Blog Talk Radio.
We have a really exceptional guest on this episode of the Ajay Bruno Show. Today I'm privileged to welcome Captain Dale Dye to the program. Throughout his remarkable career, he served for 2 decades in the United States Marine Corps and has since been an actor and technical advisor on many highly regarded projects. Good afternoon, sir. It's great to speak to you.
Hi, Ajay. It's good to be here with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. Fantastic. So let's first talk about your military background. I read that you were inspired by a World War II veteran to join the service. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I guess that would probably be my Uncle Adrian, who was an extraordinary sailor during World War II. He was a gunner's mate aboard destroyers in the Pacific and was at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked. Blown off into the water, got aboard a destroyer, and was sunk in the battle off of Vella La Vella. So he was kind of a hard luck guy, but he was a guy who really understood military service and what it means and the business of service and sacrifice, and he appreciated it all his life. And I think that sort of rubbed off on me. He talked about places and things and adventures and I just knew there was something in that, something similar in it for me. So I'd have to give him a salute for pushing me in that direction.
Wow. So you were one of the few Marine combat correspondents in Vietnam. How did you come into that role, and what was serving in that like in terms of how you saw everything unfold around you?
Well, it was kind of by accident. I was originally an infantryman. I was an 81 millimeter mortarman. And I was in about 2 years, and I was really getting tired of lugging that base plate and tube around, and really seeing not much of the Marine Corps, not much of the world, except the hills of Camp Pendleton and the back of the guy that was walking in front of me. And I knew there was something more to it. I knew from studying history, as all Marines do, that there was a great wide adventure out there, that the Marine Corps did a lot of things, dollar job on a dime budget. But I wasn't seeing any of that, and I was antsy. I couldn't decide whether I'd made a mistake, and there's got to be more to it than this. And then I ran into a guy, a young sergeant who was a Marine Corps combat correspondent. He was out taking pictures and writing little stories about our unit one day. And it seemed unusual. I'd never seen anything like that before, and I walked up to him and said, "Hey, Sergeant, who the hell are you and what are you doing?" And he told me about it. And I said, you mean you can go anywhere and do anything as long? And he said, yeah, as long as you've got enough talent, enough gifted gab to turn out a little story that they can use in the base newspaper or release to the civilian papers. He said, I can go anywhere and do anything. And I said, whoa, there's what I've been looking for. So I had been the editor of my high school newspaper, and I kind of used that as a lever to pry my way into it. And I was given some tests, and they talked to me for a while to see if I was a complete knuckle-dragging dummy or whether I'd had some facility. And lo and behold, they changed my MOS, my military occupational specialty, and I was having a great time at Camp Pendleton and the Marine Corps Air Station at El Toro at the time, and then they decided, well, there's a war going on, and we think we want some combat correspondents over there, and in fact, we want a lot more of them over there because they're getting killed and wounded. And so, lo and behold, I ended up with orders to Vietnam.
Wow. So you went from being enlisted to being appointed a warrant officer to finally becoming a commissioned officer. How was the experience different on each level? Well,
it was kind of interesting. As an enlisted man, and I made it all the way up to master sergeant before I finally succumbed to the prefrontal lobotomy and went to officer candidate school. I became enthusiastic about the Marine Corps and everything the Marine Corps did and everything the military in general did, because I had such a great opportunity to see all sides of everything. I could go practically anywhere that I could, talk my way into. And I began to serve with sailors and serve with airmen and serve with soldiers and go to some of their schools and involve myself in some of their training. And that was really, really special for me. It gave me a big, broad look at what the United States military does and how it does it, and in many cases why it does it. And I was always interested in that. And then as a warrant officer, they selected me out to be a public affairs officer. And I thought, well, here I am as the command spokesman for the rest of my days. But it didn't turn out that way at all. In fact, I really started leading at that point and was assigned to several detached and deployed units around the world that really gave me a glimpse of what the officer's life is about. And yet, because I was a Marine warrant officer and a pretty salty old guy, I could get away with things. I could, I didn't have to play politics too much. And I liked it. And then I said, well, if I can get away with this with just a red and gold bar on my shoulder here, maybe I should ask to convert my commission and see if I can get on to bigger and better things. Excuse me, which I did. And I was able to convert my commission directly from chief warrant officer to first lieutenant, and was deployed as then made captain, and was deployed with the American multinational peacekeeping force, which was euphemistically called a peacekeeping force in Beirut, Lebanon, in '82 and '83.
There wasn't a lot of peacekeeping at that time there.
No, there wasn't a lot of peace.
No, no, that's for sure. Can you tell us about being in that situation and how it differed from the mayhem of Vietnam?
Well, Vietnam, even though, there's a lot of controversy about the nature of that combat, for those of us who were fighting it down on the ground, carrying the rifle and the grenades, it was pretty straightforward. I mean, you can call it what you want to, but it's the same as, they can call Korea a peace action. But for the guys who were fighting it, it was a war. And that's exactly what it was for us in the northern I Corps part of Vietnam. I mean, it was an all-out balls-to-the-wall facing NVA, North Vietnamese Army, regular units, well-equipped, well-supplied, well-trained, coming down from the north. And we were bumping into them and fighting like hell. So it was a war to us. And then later on, after that war, and we got ourselves involved in the first portions of the Middle East, the first phases of the Middle East involvement for America. And we went in with a force of French and Italian troops, first of all, to evacuate Yasser Arafat and the PLO, and then were called back in, and the quagmire, as I like to call it, the tar pit, began. And we got ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper enmeshed in what had essentially been a civil war, and we were a buffer force between the Israelis on one end and the Palestinian and PLO arrayed or aligned guerrilla forces within the city on the other. And it was really a very political mission. We weren't allowed to do the very simple things that all of us are taught in basic training or officer candidate school. Things like patrol, seek and control the high ground, patrol your own perimeter, don't bunch up, allow limited access. We weren't allowed to do any of those things. We were essentially functioning under two chains of command. There was the Marine Corps Navy Command, the forces that put us ashore in Lebanon, and then there was the political command that was being run through the United States Embassy. And what the military knew we should do to protect ourselves and to accomplish the mission, which was essentially to be a presence, whatever that word means, but to be there so that forces who were wanting to stir the pot in Lebanon would be afraid to do so for fear of retaliation. We just weren't able to do that. And as we attempted to do it, and as we tried one thing and we tried another thing, they began to push and push and push. And I'm talking here about dissident units or dissident elements throughout the city of Beirut. And we weren't allowed to have contact with the Israelis, official contact with the Israelis. So we were really caught in the middle. It was a quagmire. And and what occurred finally was that those dissident elements decided that regardless of what was going on, we were an easy mark, we were an easy target. We weren't defending ourselves, and we weren't allowed to strike back, so they struck first. And I think in October of 1983, when they hit us at what's euphemistically called the Marine Barracks, it was actually the Battalion Landing Team headquarters, killing around 241 of us. What essentially happened was the first shot in the global war on terrorism was fired that day.
Mm-hmm. It's shocking how much of a role politics played in that whole situation. And I mean, especially in Beirut. I mean, this is a city that used to be called the Paris of the Middle East, and now look at it, what it's like today. I mean, the fact that
absolutely,
it's terrible. So going back a bit here to Vietnam, that was obviously one of the more controversial wars in recent times. Despite the really terrible price paid in human life, do you think the cause being fought for was a just one, and could a better strategy been utilized that would have resulted in defeating the communists?
AJ, you're asking a guy who's chewed on this for almost 50 years now, I guess. But look, I just recently, February of last year, I just recently went back to Vietnam with some of my buddies, some of my fellow combat correspondents, and it was the first time I'd ever returned. And it was a trip that was haunted by ghosts and memories and that sort of thing. And thank God I was there with some people that I knew and who had been through it with me, because it was very emotional. But I came away from something. In fact, let me just tell you, I fought in the Battle of Hue City in Tet of 1968. So I visited Hue and looked at the citadel where I was wounded, and I looked around me, and there was an entire generation of Vietnamese, young Vietnamese, very prosperous, very happy, and not at all living under the communist yoke. And I was sitting with one of my friends, and we were watching this great parade of consumerism and happy people passing by. And he said to me, you know, I guess we made a difference. Had we not taken a stand, had we not opened up this nation and let them look past the horror and the brutality of war, what they could have, you know, we wouldn't be seeing this. And I think that was right. So to answer your question, sure, there might have been a better strategy. Sure, we might have done things differently. You know, I'd have to be a much more qualified observer than to really suggest that to you. And there have been zillions of books and television programs written about it. But looking at the shape of the southern part of Vietnam today tells me that we did something right, that we made a difference. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. That's all you should expect, is that you made a little difference.
Sure. And one of the things I find interesting comparing that to, say, Korea, you know, I've spoken to people from Vietnam. Obviously, you're not going to talk to anyone in North Korea. So why is it, do you think, that the Vietnamese government is not as authoritarian in terms of, you know, letting its people have some basic freedoms as opposed to North Korea, where it's basically a complete lockdown?
Well, once again, you're asking a guy who may not be qualified to answer that, AJ, but here's what I think. I think the Vietnamese saw the light. I mean, I think, you know, the Vietnamese Politburo, while they still wave their arms around and stage May Day parades and so on and so forth, and proclaim to be part of the great worldwide communist juggernaut, They're not. They've taken a look around at the world and the way the world has developed and what capitalism can bring, what freedom can bring, what individual choice and democracy can bring. And they've glommed onto it big time in a practical way. Philosophically, they still proclaim to be not at all interested in that sort of thing and dedicated socialists. But that's BS. And anybody who goes over there and looks at that nation, as I just did recently, knows that's BS. Now, part of that, I think, is because they've been exposed through Western traffic and access to the internet and proximity to places like Thailand, that they have seen the value. They've seen the light. They're in the amen corner now. North Korea has never done that. Their closest relatively democratic ally or relatively democratic neighbor is South Korea, with whom they are purportedly still at war. And, of course, there's a great Chinese juggernaut on their other border. So they haven't had the advantage of seeing the other side of the coin, whereas I think the northern Vietnamese have.
Sure. Well, with North Korea, that's obviously been a long-standing problem geopolitically. Some would say that it would have been better if General MacArthur had not only held the entire country, but gone into China as well to head off a future threat there. What's your take on how that whole war panned out, and what do you think should have been done?
Well, look, I'm convinced that we probably should have had a much more limited objective in Korea. We should have driven the North Koreans out of the South and held there. But you had, a relatively megalomaniac sort of megalomania-infused commander in MacArthur who didn't understand a thing about limited war and never would, or limited objectives and never would. He wasn't cut from that cloth. He didn't think that way. And he wanted to go all the way, and he wanted, after the Chinese came in, he wanted to use nuclear weapons. He was gasping. Yeah. So I think we went into it allowing, and I think Harry Truman was perfectly justified in firing him. We went into that war unclear about the objectives, and there should have been a lesson there, but there wasn't, and clearly we paid a price for that later in life. There should have been a lesson there about getting yourself involved and meshed in an Asian land war, which pundits had warned against for years and years and years. We also didn't learn that lesson. But in the end, who knows? I think it may all change in the near future. If our president goes in there and holds a strong line and yet gives the North Korean dictator a little room so that he's not embarrassed and doesn't look like a complete boob that he is, we might see a change in this. We might see a final solution to it. Because I think once the North Korean people, God bless them, I mean, if you talk about people who've lived a horrible existence, there's generations of North Koreans that just don't get it. I think once they do get it, once they're provided an opportunity to take a look around, like the North Vietnamese, they'll find a way to make it happen. I mean, they're going to want to save face, and they will, and that's human, and I understand that. But I think we're in for big changes in North Korea shortly.
Hopefully so. So I heard that you favor reinstituting the draft. How would you see implementing something like that? And given the sheer size of our population now, wouldn't that mean that most of the people would never be drafted anyway?
Probably so. I think the answer to the last part of your question is, yeah, that's probably true. But look, I don't know exactly how it would be implemented. Here's what I know, or what I think I know. The draft was America's great leveler for American males. It offered an opportunity for 2 years of your life to get out of whatever your life was about and to see bigger things and to see different things and to meet and live with and learn to coexist with people that otherwise you would never have seen in your life because you would live such a confined existence in your hometown or in your home state. Here was a chance for young Americans to go and see a bigger part of the world, to get to know people, to get to understand that there is a common denominator in just being human. And I think we're missing that. I think that's part of all this sort of sectarian business that goes on. So many partisan opinions and a divided nation, divided over silly things that never were divisive factors in our nation before. So I look at the draft as an opportunity to become more American, to become invested in your nation and how your nation does, because you put some skin in the game. You serve for a couple of years. You put up with some hardships. You put up with some nonsense. And perhaps you sacrificed. Those things, I think, are part of what makes you a better citizen. I think it teaches you so many valuable life lessons, and we really don't have any institutions these days, unless you volunteer to join the military. We don't have many institutions these days that will do that for you.
I think you make a good point. We definitely lost something along the way.
Yeah.
So, pivoting a bit here, let's talk about the Conquerors. Back when the History Channel actually made good programs, you hosted a fantastic series. What was making that show like? And of all the Conquerors you covered in that show, whose military skills are you most impressed by?
Well, I've always been a great fan of Alexander. In fact, I was the second unit director on that movie that Oliver Stone did, and I was anxious to do it because I'd always been a fan of Alexander. I think he was a geopolitical military genius. He was a leader who combined not only military tactical skills but strategic political skills. Of course, who knows what what Alexander would be like if he had to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs today. But I think he had the kind of drive and the kind of vision I think great military leaders always have. And I had an opportunity during the making of Conquerors to really enmesh myself in what we know or what the scholars tell us they know of Alexander. So I was particularly interested in that. And in doing the Conquerors, the History Channel, as you said, when they when they were trying to transition from being the Hitler Channel, they really were anxious to have good programming that had the military themes, and they recognized me as a guy who had a little following among TV viewers and that sort of thing, and they let me go at it as I wanted to. So I could help write the scripts, I could help do the research, and sometimes even did little field demonstrations of tactics, and so that was fun. For me, that was play, and I really liked it. And I think we did 18 episodes or something like that, and then the History Channel decided they didn't want to continue, and I went off and made movies and wrote books. But that was a fun experience, and when I went back later on in my career and with some of the cable channels and tried to do more reality programming sort of stuff, the venue had changed, the platform had changed. They weren't interested in historical facts anymore. They were interested in flash and wow and entertainment. And I think that was to their detriment, and I'm sure it was, given what I'm seeing these days. But making Conquerors was fun. I enjoyed it.
To me, learning about history is entertaining. So for the fact that anyone would prefer a much trashier form of reality programming compared to that, I just don't understand it.
Yeah. I don't get it either. And I was interested, when they, I think I forget what the cable is offering now, but there's the History Channel, and then there's the American Heroes Channel, and then there's God knows what else. Mm-hmm. But I think they're still casting about, and they're ignoring an audience. I mean, do you understand, AJ? I'm sure that we now have a generation of young American men and women who have served, who are veterans now, right. And coming back from Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Syria, and they carry with them an intense interest in things military. And I think if the cable channels were smart, which they're not, they'd be going after that audience. I certainly would.
No, there's a tailor-made audience for that, and they're lost by not doing that, for sure. So your most known TV role is probably in Band of Brothers as Colonel Robert Sink, and you were also a technical advisor in its spiritual sequel, The Pacific. I think both of those series are just such a tremendous tribute to the greatest generation. What did it mean to you personally to be involved in both of those?
Well, look, I guess I have to answer it from a couple of directions here. Let me see what I can do. I love, as an actor, I love playing real people, where I can get involved in a real life and do real research and try to bring that person to life on the screen. And I got to do that playing Colonel Sink in Band of Brothers, arguably my most recognizable role, I guess, and that was fun. I mean, his family, he was dead at the time we did the thing, but his family sent me recordings of his voice when he was making speeches and that sort of thing, and I was able to really get into that character and bring him to life as the father of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment. So as an actor, that was an absolute plum. I loved it. And as a matter of fact, they're bringing me back to Normandy next month with some of the other actors from Band of Brothers. So this long after we made it, we still have a huge following and a huge audience here in America and in Europe.
Oh wow!
Now, as the military advisor and the guy who trained the troops and staged all the combat and all that sort of thing, I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better assignment. They gave me literally everything I wanted and said, all we want you to do is get it right. All we want you to do is make sure it is an honorable, entertaining salute to, as you said, the greatest generation, or a little element of the greatest generation. And when they turn you loose like that, and they listen to what you say, and they let you get your teeth into it, and they give you 3 weeks to train troops, and you can train the enemy as well as the allies. I mean, for a guy who purports to be a military advisor, as I do, and for my staff who worked with me and supported me through this thing, I mean, that was nirvana. That was absolutely the best you can get. And we repeated it with the Pacific, but I think we didn't do as good a job with the Pacific as we did with Band of Brothers. But there are a number of interesting reasons for that. But the important thing, I think, is what you alluded to, and that is that those series, to this day, are still being used in the military as periods of military instruction. They go through them. They go through them at the Naval Academy, at West Point, the Military Academy, the Air Force Academy. They go through these things, and young men and women binge watch them. And I'm, it's amazing. I go to the grocery store to get bread and milk, and some guy in the line behind me will recognize me and start doing Colonel Sink lines from Band of Brothers. So, it was a big part of my career and an absolute joy to do.
Sure. No, they were both great shows. I had a slight preference for the Pacific, but I'm sure working on it, you had your reasons to prefer Band of Brothers. But.
Well, here's what happened. I think because Band of Brothers was such a thumping success and was so popular, we tried to overdo it in the Pacific, I think. We picked three main characters. John Basilone, all of whom were in different regiments of the 1st Marine Division. John Basilone in the 7th, Bob Leckie with the 1st Marines, and Gene Sledge with the 5th Marines. And we kept bouncing back and forth in the 10 episodes that presented the Pacific. And I think audiences didn't have that attachment to people they saw every week as they did with one single company of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, Easy Company, in Band of Brothers. So we didn't do as well in terms of audience appreciation. Of course, Marines and sailors love the hell out of it, but we're a minority anyway. So so that I think is we got drunk with success, I think, and went too far with the Pacific. We should have pulled it back to one of those characters and stayed with them.
That's a fair point. So in Falling Skies, you played a seasoned military officer in a situation probably more desperate than any other character you've played. What did you draw on as an influence for that role, and do you think your character ultimately survived?
I wish I knew whether he ultimately survives. He just sort of disappeared, and the writers didn't bother to explain it to me. But it was interesting. I mean, I love Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers and another movie that I worked on that was kind of disappointing. But I love the futuristic looks at the military, and them being used, and it's an old movie trope, but the military coming to the rescue when we're invaded by aliens and that sort of thing. And Falling Skies was exactly that. And working with Noah Wyle and some of the other relatively well-known actors was a treat. And really, I couldn't do anything wrong. Because who knows what the hell the military would do when they fell apart and they were devastated by an alien invasion. So it was fun to speculate. We would sit around and talk about it, saying, "What do you think would happen if really?" And that was fun. I like doing that sort of thing.
Great. So touching on a few of the many great movies you've been in, I was a huge fan of Under Siege and Under Siege 2 growing up. What was it like playing that character in that and its sequel, and what were your interactions like working with Steven Seagal?
Well, Steven's a larger-than-life character, and nobody gets much attention when he's on the set. And really, all I had to do mainly was sit around a conference table and defend him against detractors. Which was relatively easy to do, but there was they wanted to bring some verisimilitude, somebody who would look like a senior SEAL officer, who could explain the jeopardy. And it was, I often say I'm the most typecast guy in Hollywood. It was me and Lee Ermey, God bless him. We just lost him not long ago. But Lee and I often used to say we were the most typecast guys in Hollywood, and I think that's true. And that's what happened in the Under Siege movies. They said, "Well, give me that white-haired guy that knows how to talk military, and bring him in here, and he'll explain the jeopardy." And essentially, that's what happened. But it was fun, and you make a pretty good chunk of change doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, that always helps. Actually, I was going to mention Arlie Ermey in a few minutes. I was curious. I always thought of you two as kind of a pair of great Marine warrior actors. What was your relationship like with him, and do you have any other thoughts you want to share about his legacy?
Sure. You're actually the first person I've really talked to about it since Lee passed. He was a very close friend, and we often got together and we would talk about, kind of snicker and laugh up our sleeves at how we put one over on Hollywood, because neither one of us is a trained actor, and yet we've managed to carve out these careers. And Lee and I were really kindred spirits. I loved being around him. We would do personal appearances together every once in a while, and we'd call each other and laugh because we'd see some trope on the internet that would say, well, if there was a throwdown, who would win, Captain Dye or Gunny Ermey? And we just laugh about it, as if that would ever happen. But he was such a sweetheart, and had despite his image, and I got to tell you, Lee had a rough exterior, and I guess so do I, and we promote that because it's part and parcel of our image. But Lee had a very, very kind heart. He was a man who truly wanted to do what he could to help America's veterans and to support America's armed forces. He felt very deeply, as I did, that we came home from Vietnam and didn't get a very welcoming reception, and we had vowed, he and I had vowed, that we'd be part of any effort that made sure that kind of thing didn't happen to the new generation of veterans coming home. So we had much in common. Not only our Marine Corps service, but the way we thought about things and the way we tried to do things. So I was on location in Baton Rouge when his manager called me and said that Lee had gone, and it wrecked me because I felt it was a throwback to losing a buddy in combat, and I had all the same emotions. He was a treasure, and I'm sorry he's gone, but he'll be remembered well and fondly.
No, I wish I could have met him too. He seemed like would have been a great person to know.
Yeah, great guy.
Sure. I wanted to touch
of course,
on.
He'd be laughing right now because he's left me as the only veteran now so I'm the big target. But he'd be laughing about that.
Well, I always thought of you two on the same level, so that's great. Well, a couple other movies before we get to our last question here. I'm sure you've been asked about Saving Private Ryan a lot. To me, that's just such a pinnacle war movie. Of all the movies you've worked on, do you think that's the one that's made the greatest impact on depicting realism in modern war films?
If you're willing to talk strictly about theatrical motion pictures, yes. If you're talking about in toto, no, because I think Band of Brothers in the Pacific have to be right there on that verisimilitude level, that reality level. But Ryan was a treat to make because Steven Spielberg is a wonderful director. I don't have to say that. I think people know that. But he's also the kind of guy that trusts, that will let people he trusts seriously help him make a movie. And that's what he did with me. It was a great experience. He let me virtually stage that entire 1,000-man attack on Omaha Beach, and when you get an opportunity like that, and when you're working with a filmmaker who has Steven's skills and camera savvy and story savvy, and then you've got Tom Hanks and the other actors, it doesn't get much better. You're in what we would call in Southeast Missouri hog heaven, and I think that was really the case. There were no lows. It was tremendously hard work, but there were no low points. Everything was a joy to do because it was being done right, and the director and all the other department heads were insisting that it be done right. And if I said, no, that's not right, we got to fix this, they would, by God, fix it. And when you're in a situation like that, it's a treat, I'll tell you. So what we got was a really, really, really wonderful movie that, you know, drew kudos all over the place. I mean, the only thing that ever disappointed me about it was that it lost the Oscar to Shakespeare in Love. I mean,
I think we know which one of those movies was better. So.
Yeah,
no.
I'm still scratching my head over that one, but
no.
But it was a delight to make, and I'm really, really glad that it's another movie that the American military and militaries around the world, frankly, watch constantly. And if you're entertaining consistently the guys who really know and who really care, the guys and gals who really know and really care, I mean, you've done some good work. And that's the way I look at Saving Private Ryan.
That makes sense. So I'm curious, a few years ago you worked, I believe, your first animated movie in Planes, Fire, and Rescue. What was that sort of experience like for you compared to some of the other roles you've been in?
Well, it's interesting. I have a kind of a distinctive voice, in particular when I'm doing military roles. And I guess that comes from shouting orders and doing close order drill for so many years. But Steven Spielberg once told me that he cast me in a movie called Always about firefighters. It was a remake of an old 1950s movie. He said, I cast you because I heard you on the radio in Platoon. And I said, that's exactly the voice I want. And so that's kind of followed me. I have been the voice, the radio voice, or the helicopter pilot voice in so many movies that I'm uncredited for, I can't tell you about. But what happened was the directors called me when this animated film came up, and they said, we want to create an airplane character that's former military and talks like that and has a voice like that, and you're it. So I said, guys, you sure? And they brought me down and sort of showed me the character and told me the background, and they said, now look, we want you to sort of invent stuff that this kind of character would say. So once again, it wasn't just doing scripted lines. I was inventing stuff as I went along, and when you get a chance to do that, beside actors like Ed Harris and Donald Sutherland and some of the other voices, I mean, you're in pretty tall cotton, and it's fun. So I enjoyed it. I had a good time with it. That's
great. So in closing, I know you just filmed a movie in Louisiana, and you're developing a new film with Tom Hanks. Can you tell us about those that you're working on?
Sure. Tom Hanks and I just finished working on a World War II Navy movie called Greyhound, which is a story of a destroyer skipper played by Tom, in the Battle of the North Atlantic in the early days of World War II, escorting convoys and fighting off U-boats. A great story that Tom wrote. And so I went down and served as his military advisor and kind of his confidant on that movie that we shot mostly aboard the USS Kidd, which is now a Fletcher-class destroyer moored as a museum ship in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And Tom has signed on to be my executive producer in the movie that I wrote and will direct called No Better Place to Die, which is another World War II D-Day story. But this takes place before the beach landings. It's the story of the 82nd Airborne's jump into Normandy, and they're a small unit of them who fought and held a vital bridge at La Fière. It's called No Better Place to Die. I hope to be shooting it this summer. And we're looking around to cast some A-list actors right now. Tom's being very helpful with it. And when you've got a guy like Tom Hanks as your executive producer, you actually get some traction in Hollywood. So I'm hoping all works out well with that one.
That sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. And once again, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thanks for coming on today.
Well, thanks, AJ. It was great to talk to you, and good luck with what you're doing. I hope you get many, many, many more people listening to you.
Appreciate that. Hope so, and take care.
Thanks, AJ.
Thanks. That was Captain Dale Dye. We had a really great conversation there. Be sure to join us next Monday. We'll be joined by Governor Robert Ehrlich. Until then, this has been Ajay Bruno for the Ajay Bruno Show. Signing off for now, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.